You're listening to Raised by Spirit, Bloodline by Design, written and narrated by ancestral medium Jenn LeFevre. Decree 10. The past reveals truth when witnessed. Passage 10. The house that called her back. By mid-2015, Jenn and her family found themselves standing at the edge of another transition. The owners of their rented home had decided to sell the property to their son, giving her family just 3 months to find somewhere new. She had felt the shift coming, that quiet certainty that life was rearranging itself, but knowing there's purpose behind a storm's arrival didn't make walking through it any easier. Her boys needed stability. Home wasn't just a roof, it was identity, it was the container for their childhood. And now, once again, they were being asked to dismantle the very thing they'd worked so hard to rebuild. Housing options were scarce in their small town, and as the weeks dragged on, even staying in the same school district was becoming more and more unlikely. By the end of those 3 months, they had accepted they might have no choice but to move out of their hometown, yet again. The day before they were set to finalize a deposit on a house outside the boys' school district, Jeremy looked at her with absolute certainty and said, "Mom, we're not moving there." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head at how impossible their situation felt. It seemed only a miracle could keep them from leaving. But she knew miracles had a quiet way of arriving, and so she asked, "Why's that?" "Grandpa showed me the house we're moving to in my dream last night," Jeremy explained. "It's a big white house, and it's in our town, so just keep looking, okay?" The next morning she found it. A big white house, newly listed, just as Jeremy had described. Appearing overnight, quiet yet sudden. She felt the pull immediately, driving straight to the address with Jeremy. When they arrived, Jeremy leaned forward and said, "This is what he showed me, Mom. This is the house." Before them stood a massive plantation home built in 1828, carrying a quiet certainty that it had been waiting for their arrival. Later that evening, they met with the owners for a tour, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited inside. The house wasn't move-in ready, not even close. It had been abandoned for 6 months. The previous family had been unable to afford heating such a large space. Water lines had burst, ruining sections of the floors, and mold had spread through the kitchen, feeding on food left to rot for months. It looked as though they'd fled in the middle of the night, taking only what they could carry, leaving everything else behind in a 3,000-square-foot manor that now sat eerily vacant. She knew this was where she needed to be, but the work ahead of her was far more daunting than simply moving out of the district. Still, she accepted the challenge. At the time, Rich was working long days running the contracting company with his brother-in-law, which meant Jenn had to do most of this alone. To this day, she doesn't know how they managed to clear out the remnants of the previous owners, move in their own belongings, and turn the space into something livable in just 14 days. It should have been impossible, yet somehow it got done. From the moment they received the keys, their lives shifted. They were not alone in the house. A little girl lingered in the corners, silent, unseen by most, but unmistakable to Jenn. She followed her from room to room as Jenn scrubbed away years of neglect, her presence gentle but persistent, as if whispering, "I know you can see me." Then, without warning, the vacuum cord ripped itself from the wall, yanked with force. Moments later, the lights flickered on and off, not in the random stutter of faulty wiring, but in a deliberate rhythm. Pleased to be acknowledged, yes. But Jenn had to keep moving. She had too much to do, too much to clean, too much to repair. A week after the family settled in, Jeremy came downstairs, eyes wide and breath unsteady. "Mom, my dumbbell just rolled across the floor, and then my door shut by itself." She barely blinked. "Did you take the time to see who it was?" "No," he replied. Of course he hadn't. "Go upstairs," she said calmly. "You know how to talk to them. See who they are and let me know." Later that night, Jeremy came back downstairs, frustrated and clutching his chest. "I feel like I'm having an asthma attack," he said. "It's bothering me." Her attention sharpened instantly. Jeremy hadn't had asthma symptoms in over 10 years. This wasn't physical. This was energetic. It was time to stop. It was time to listen. She guided him onto the porch, letting the night settle around them as they waited. It didn't take long before two children stepped forward, hesitant but relieved to finally be acknowledged. "I'm Elizabeth. I'm 8. And this is Michael Andrew. He's 10. Michael nodded, eyes fixed on the house. "My dad built this house. A long time ago," he said. "I lived here too, with my aunt and uncle," she said. Elizabeth paused, gathering herself. "My mama died when I was born. My daddy, he died at sea. So they raised me with Michael. Michael's like my brother." Jenn gave her a gentle nod, inviting her to continue. Elizabeth turned toward the lake, the dark shape she knew by heart resting beyond the orchard. "The water froze every winter," she said. "We played on it all the time. It was our favorite thing. But one year," her voice flickered, "the cold came too fast. The ice looked the same, but it wasn't." Michael swallowed. "I ran out first. I wanted to show her it was safe," he said. Elizabeth's eyes filled. "He fell in. I tried to pull him out. I did everything I could, but I wasn't strong enough. I ran for my uncle. I screamed for him. By the time he got there, Michael wasn't moving anymore. It was so cold. I couldn't breathe." Elizabeth continued, softer now. "I got sick after that. Scarlet fever. My uncle rode out to get medicine, but the cold was so bad that year. Everything was ice." She looked down at her hands. "I died the night he left. And he never made it back." Jenn felt the weight of it settle. Michael spoke again. "My mama was the only one left. She turned the house into a place for kids who had nowhere to go. She didn't want to lose the home my father built. We love it here. We don't want to leave," Elizabeth said quietly. Michael spoke again, almost apologetic. "I didn't mean to bother you. I couldn't breathe at the end. I thought you'd understand," he said. Elizabeth stepped closer. "I flickered the lights. I pulled the cord. I knew you could see me. I wasn't giving up." Jenn smiled. "I understand." That night, the four of them made an agreement. Jenn would listen when the children needed to speak, and the children would honor the boundaries in return. Time moved forward, and as Jenn grew into her purpose, the house revealed more of its own. But while one story was awakening, another was falling apart. At the same time, her mother's world continued to unravel. Her suspicion had always been there, woven into conversations and shaping her relationship with family. But now it had seeped into every corner of her life. In secret, over the course of a decade, she'd returned to old habits, continuing to numb what she refused to heal. It blurred the edges of truth, distorting her perceptions, strengthening the belief that she was under attack. She wasn't just debating theology with Jenn. She was calling the police, convinced her neighbors were trying to break in, accusing them of conspiring against her. And when she was proved otherwise, her storyline shifted. Suddenly they were jealous of her relationship with God. They too became evil and out to get her. This pattern followed her everywhere. Each time the accusations began, each time the conflict escalated, she refused to pay rent, packed up, and moved on. Apartment to apartment, neighborhood to neighborhood, leaving behind a trail of strained landlords and frustrated neighbors. Over the years, the cycle repeated so many times that there were fewer and fewer places willing to take her in. By June of 2018, it all caught up to her. At 71 years old, she had no choice but to call Jenn and confess she had only 3 days to move and nowhere to go. Jenn didn't wait. She canceled everything: appointments, classes, meditations. She and her sister packed their mother's apartment piece by piece, condensing a lifetime into cardboard boxes and rushed decisions. By the time the last box was taped shut, the decision was made. She had to move in with Jenn. But she wasn't just bringing her mother into her home. She was bringing the whole damn shadow with her. Still, she figured, fuck it, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. She couldn't let her mother end up on the streets, not when she had the space to give her a room of her own. Her mother struggled with the arrangement, but she had no other choice. Jenn tried to soften the edges. "This'll be a good thing," she said. "You'll save money. No rent, no food costs, no bills. You'll have time to get stable." Yet stability never came. just 2 months after her mother moved in, Jenn was holding a group session, 10 to 15 people gathered in her kitchen, learning to listen beyond the physical. During intermission, she and a few others stepped outside for a smoke. That's when she heard Maggie. She just went in the kitchen and saw what you're doing. Shit, she whispered under her breath. Before she could step inside to intervene, her mother appeared in the doorway, a suitcase in her hand. She wasn't just leaving, she was making a statement. She opened the door, walked past Jenn and the students, set the suitcase in the car, then turned back to face them. "I won't be part of whatever devil worship you're trying to dress up as devotion," she said. Her hand pointed toward the porch, as though the accusation carried enough fire to scorch them where they stood. Jenn was taken back by the sheer hatred in her mother's voice, so stunned she didn't even think to fire back. Instead, she steadied herself, guided the students back inside, and finished class. When the last student left, she stepped into her mother's room, only to find that most of her belongings were gone. Jenn called her. No answer. She asked her sister to call. Still no answer. She didn't know where she'd gone or whether she was safe, but as she looked around the room, she realized her father's ashes were sitting on the nightstand. In 14 years, her mother had never parted from them, ever. She wasn't sure whether her mother had moved out or simply staged a performance meant to publicly humiliate her. As she sat in her room, she searched for answers in the silence until she couldn't sit anymore. Finally, she picked up her father's ashes, lowered herself to the ground, and whispered, "Daddy, what am I supposed to do?" All he showed her was a sword, so bright it seemed rimmed in blue flame. She waited for more, but he continued to hold the sword firmly in his hands. "What does this mean?" she asked. But no answer came. In the days that followed, her mother didn't return, but a familiar pattern did. Jenn's phone began shutting off at random. No rhythm, no rhyme. Just an instant collapse into darkness and a sudden reboot. At first, she dismissed it. "Piece of shit phone," she mumbled. Then she heard her father's voice. "Look at the time," he said. The moment she picked up her phone to look, it shut off to reboot. As it restarted, the screen flashed for only a few seconds, just long enough for her to see it. October 29th, 2018, 2:35 p.m. Then the time and date snapped back to normal. Wait, what does that mean? A few hours later, she heard him again. "Look," he said. The phone rebooted once more as she glanced at it. The date had changed, but not the time. November 8th, 2018, 2:35 p.m. Later that night, as she was telling Jeremy about the occurrences, his phone rebooted in his hand mid-conversation. She grabbed it as it restarted, and another impossible date appeared. December 8th, 2018, 2:35 p.m. She knew the dates weren't random, so she searched for their pattern. Orion's voice moved through her mind with a whisper of his reminder from the Hall of Scribes. "This is the architecture of creation," he said. "Not a ladder, not a sequence. The call you feel is not a summons forward, it's a summons back. You have stood in the place where creation begins. You have carried the flame through lifetimes. And now you return, not to ascend, but to fulfill what was written in the first breath." The truth of his words shined at the edge of her awareness, vast and luminous, yet the totality of it remained just beyond reach. The next morning, Jenn woke to Orion's voice again. Clear, direct, unmistakable. "Hotel 153, he said. She searched the local hotel listings and found one with that exact address. She knew she had to go. She needed to see if her mother was really staying there, and why. She figured if her mother was there and she brought her father's ashes, maybe they could actually talk. So she grabbed the urn, got in the car, and headed into the city. When she pulled into the hotel parking lot, her jaw dropped. Her mother's car was parked right outside. Jenn texted her sister and stepped out of the car, steadying herself before walking to the door. She knocked once, and to her surprise, her mother answered. For a split second, astonishment flickered in her eyes, raw and unguarded, a flash of shock as Jenn stood before her, but as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. swallowed by the shadow that had been feeding on her for years. Disgust settled over her face like a spreading stain. "Why are you staying at a hotel?" she asked. Her mother erupted. The accusations came fast, wild, unhinged, spilling out as if the shadow had been waiting for this moment to speak. She ranted about events from 14 years ago as if they were happening now, her voice sharpened by a fury that didn't belong to her. Then her shadow struck with perfect accuracy. "Your father would be ashamed of you. Look at what you've become. You think you're offering me a home? A home built on the devil's work? I'll never live under the same roof as the devil itself. I would rather sleep on the streets than live with you," she said. "You are not our child. You are pure evil." The words struck with a precision no human cruelty could craft, each one guided by the shadow that wanted her undone, each one slicing through bone and memory until even her breath felt stolen. Jenn simply handed her the ashes and walked away. On the drive home, she called her sister, told her what had happened, and that the responsibility was now hers. At this point, all she could offer was financial help from a distance. When she finally arrived home, she sat in the kitchen and cried. "This is my mother," she whispered. "I could never imagine doing this to my children." Moments later, Rich and the boys walked into the kitchen, only to find Jenn wiping her tears as if she could hide the pain. "What happened?" Rich asked. Jenn told them everything. The ashes, the hotel, the accusations, the words no mother should ever say. When she finished, she looked at her sons. "Listen to me," she said. "Your relationship with your grandmother is yours and yours alone. Don't let what happened between her and me change that." The boys were quiet. "I love you," she continued. "I love you more than anything in this world, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing, that could ever change that. Do you hear me?" The boys nodded. Her declaration remained in the quiet that followed that evening, the house impossibly still. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she was drawn into a dream where she found herself standing in a vast expanse of desert, the sky washed in gold, the air moving with a quiet, ancient pulse. A single enormous tree rose from the sand, its roots disappearing into the earth like veins carrying memory. Its branches shimmered with a faint blue glow, as though lit from within. Orion stood beside her, his stance strong, his eyes fixed on the horizon as he motioned for her to look ahead. As she turned to see what he was pointing to, a celestial being moved toward her, towering above her with impossible height, radiant, draped in ordained violet garments, hair shimmering like strands of cosmic light. The sky seemed to bend around him. He lifted his hand and pointed toward the tree. At its base, half buried in the sand, something glowed. Not an ember, not a flame, a pulse, a heartbeat. The sand shifted, revealing a faint blue shimmer beneath the surface, a light flickering like a memory trying to return. Before she could reach for it, the desert wind rose again, swirling around her in a spiral of gold and blue. As the wind settled, a stone pedestal stood before her, a glowing bowl of white flames resting at its center. The celestial being guided her toward it, placing her hands inside the bowl. When he lifted them out of the bowl, her hands were infused with a living current of blue and white flames. Orion's voice drifted through the wind. "Meet the alchemist of divine transmutation," he said. The celestial being then lowered his head until his eyes met hers. His voice followed, ancient, resonant. "I am Germaine," he said. Before she could speak, before she could even take a breath, she woke with her heart pounding, the dream dissolving just as her alarm went off. That day, she was volunteering at a community book sale, spending the afternoon answering questions and keeping the tables in order. As the sun dipped lower and the crowd finally thinned, she turned to the last of the donations. That's when she noticed a box of books on the ground, filled with a complete collection of old green-covered books. She asked where they should go and how much to price them for. One of the women just waved her hand. "Oh, those? Just put them in the free pile," Jenn laughed. "If they're free, I might as well see if any are worth taking home." She reached in and grabbed the first book from the box. The moment she opened it, the atmosphere around her shifted. The page she landed on spoke of devotion to Archangel Michael and the angelic host, of service to the light, of ancient ministries returning to earth. She sat down with the box and began flipping through page after page, book after book. They were all collections of channelings from Saint Germain, Archangel Michael, and other ascended masters. That was the same name I heard in my dream. But who is Saint Germain? The thought rattled through her, sharp and insistent. She turned another page, and then she saw him. Not a resemblance. Him, Saint Germain. Exactly as he'd appeared in her dream, the same clothing, the same eyes, the same unmistakable presence that had stood before her. The page stared back at her like a mirror held up to destiny. She flipped to another page where again it spoke of Archangel Michael's long-standing guardianship of humanity, of his return to assist the one who wielded the sword. The sword. The words escaped her before she even knew she'd spoken. Jenn quickly gathered the complete collection of books, determined to take them home and decode whatever this message was. Later that evening, as she read, the books explained that this sword wasn't a physical blade, but a frequency, a force, a living current of eternal fire, fire that could cut through illusion, repel destructive energies, and illuminate the path ahead. As one grew in devotion and practice, the flame intensifies, eventually becoming a permanent current of truth and authority around them. In that moment, she understood that her father hadn't been offering her a symbol to interpret. He'd been revealing something much more intricate. Later that week, while Jenn was cleaning her house, a vision struck her with a force she'd never experienced before. It stopped her mid-movement. Jenn stood frozen, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. She was no longer seeing her living room. She was seeing something else entirely, clear as day, as if she'd stepped into another reality. She found herself inside a cobblestone cottage, dirt floors stretching out beneath her, and a single small window set into the wall, its faint light revealing the cast iron bars that turned the room into a cell. Terror spread through her entire being. She looked down and saw a white nightgown on her body and legs that were unmistakably those of a child. And just as suddenly as it appeared, the vision vanished, and she was back in her living room. She stood there for a moment, confused by what she'd just experienced. Eventually, she exhaled, doing her best to set it aside and move back into the rhythm of the day. After she finished cleaning the house, she headed to the grocery store. While standing in front of the meat section, someone bumped into her from behind. Jenn spun around only to realize it was a friend who ran a local meditation group. Highly intelligent himself, he took one look at her and immediately asked what was wrong. She shared some of the challenges she was facing with her mother. He listened patiently, then said, "Maybe you should join us at meditation tonight." She had never actively pursued meditation before, but his invitation landed with a quiet inevitability, and so she agreed. That evening, while he explained his technique, Jenn found herself wondering whether she'd actually be able to meditate or if she'd just end up picking up on everyone else's energy. Her concern vanished the moment his meditation music began. In an instant, images flooded her mind, unfolding like a movie reel. At first it moved too fast to grasp, but the scene still broke through. A battlefield glowing with scattered flames. A warrior woman in humble armor moving with quiet certainty, her steps steady with a conviction beyond her years, a banner lifting behind her as if rising to answer its own call. Then the vision shifted. Now she saw a vast desert shimmering under a relentless sun. A goddess walked across the sand with the quiet undertone of ancient Egypt. Beside her, two massive lions, their paws sinking deep into the golden earth, their presence so immense that the very atmosphere seemed to bend around them as they followed her with absolute devotion. Finally, the reel slowed enough for her to see the last scene clearly. It was night, moonless, heavy, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound. A large white plantation house stood alone at the center of the vision, its columns stark against the black sky. The land around it stretched wide and empty, a ring of trees marking the edge of the property. No lanterns, no neighboring homes, nothing but open fields and a faint sound of water in the background. A woman stood outside the house with a little girl. She watched the woman strike a match and throw it onto the house. Flames erupted. The woman then led the little girl next to her to a nearby body of water, baptizing her as the vision began to dissolve. Maggie's presence wrapped around her like a warm blanket, gentle and steady. "My sweet girl, you were 7, Maggie whispered, her tone tender. "You were sleeping inside the house." Then Cora stepped in, her voice calm and certain. "This is memory," she said. Maggie's energy flowed in again. The woman outside, "Your mother," she whispered, "and the child beside her, your sister. She believed she was saving you," she continued. "She believed burning you alive was God's work. The truth didn't arrive to punish," she said. "It came to reveal." When the meditation ended, Jenn sat in the quiet. She couldn't shake the feeling that what she'd just seen was connected to the vision from earlier that day. She wasn't certain, but the possibility pressed on her, insisting on being acknowledged. Her friend, who also practiced past life regressions, was gathering his things as the others filtered out. As the room finally emptied, Jenn stepped toward him, the question already formed in her mind. She pulled him aside and spoke softly, with the weight of concern in her voice. "Would you guide me through a regression?" He studied her for only a moment. He knew her well enough to understand that she never asked for help unless she truly needed it, and she certainly wouldn't ask someone she didn't trust. No further explanation was required. He simply nodded, agreeing to meet her the next day. The following day, as he guided her into the regression, she slipped quickly into an altered state. Immediately she was pulled back into the cobblestone room, the dirt floors cold beneath her, the cast iron bars glinting faintly in the dim light. The room was heavy, dense with memory. Before she could fully orient herself, the scene shifted. She was outside now, standing at the edge of a small village made of cobblestone huts surrounded by dense forest. In the distance, a woman walked up to the village dragging a reluctant little girl behind her. The village they approached was crowded with men that made Jenn's stomach tighten. Men wrapped in armored furs and leather. They were dirty, rough, their very presence echoing the threat of harm. These men were not protectors, they were predators. She watched as the woman approached one of them. "Take this one," she commanded, tossing the little girl toward the man as if she was nothing. She felt her stomach twist. She didn't understand the full weight of what she was seeing, only that the child was being given away like an object, traded for reasons she couldn't grasp. Then the scene snapped back. She was in the cobblestone basement again. But this time she was no longer observing. She was the child. Terror flooded her system. Her heart pounded. She could no longer hear her friend's voice guiding her. It was as if she'd been pulled fully into that lifetime, reliving it from the inside. She watched the men enter the cell. She felt the dread. She felt the helplessness. She felt the violation. One by one, they assaulted her. Somewhere far away, muffled and distant, she heard her friend trying to call her back to awareness. It took several minutes for her to return to the present, disoriented by what she'd just relived. After discussing what happened, they agreed to wait a few days before trying again, but next time with the clear intention to observe, not to re-experience. When they met again, Jenn easily slipped back into the regression. She returned to the same cobblestone cell, but this time she hovered above it, observing from an aerial view. Orion's voice came through. "Listen closely, little one. You were 8 years old when she gave you away. You remained in that cell for 7 years. You died at 15 from the abuse. She watched as she died during that last assault. She saw her small body go still. She saw her spirit rise, no longer fragile but luminous. And then she saw him. Archangel Michael, unmistakable, radiant, the same being whose words she'd found in the green books. He lifted her gently, and in his hands he carried the sword, the blade blazing so fiercely white that a blue flame crowned its edges, alive and sovereign in her grasp. Orion's voice moved through her like a decree. "You've reclaimed the sword. It's always been yours." When Jenn returned and explained what she saw, her friend laughed, an odd reaction. When she asked why, he said, "That explains why you always sit with your hands folded in front of you. It's like you're holding an invisible sword." He was right. She did sit like that, and suddenly Everything that had unfolded since she asked her father for help began to make sense. She had not been navigating a single lifetime. She had been navigating through prophecy. The dates her father had shown her, October 29th, November 8th, December 8th, were not random. They were patterns, anniversaries, truth waiting to be remembered, days honoring the departed, days honoring the saints and the enlightened ones, days when the small turning of human life met the vast turning of the cosmic clock. And with that understanding came another truth, one she had carried for years but never fully claimed. Her awareness was not new, it was ancient. Her father had spoken in riddles because riddles were the only language vast enough to hold the truth. She had carried the sword through fire, through exile, through lifetimes where her existence was deemed unholy, where she was cast out, hunted, silenced, and still the flame never extinguished. Every attempt to erase her had failed because the flame remained. It had been passed down by ancestors. It had been held by warriors. It had been carried by those who remembered the truth of who they were. This was not the first lifetime her mother survived her. But in this lifetime, she would rise with the sword in her hand and the flame in her essence. And now, standing inside the moment of this remembrance, she would not rise alone. She would rise with all those who remember. And together, they would rise to awaken what was never meant to be forgotten.